As we get down now to this part of Jesus' life, thank you. Coincidentally, we're down in the same part of the year in which he died. Now, we don't know when Jesus was born, and there are a lot of things, dates and so forth, that we don't know. But we do know when he died because of the Jewish Passover, and the Jewish calendar has always been in force. And so we know when Jesus died and when he rose from the dead. And so we got here, he died 1981 years ago, day before yesterday. And he was raised from the dead 1981 years ago, about 6 o'clock this morning, as we'll see as we go along. So now today, we're going to be talking about really the burial of Jesus. Computer experts, this is not working. So let me see right here. Okay, it'll go that way, I guess. All right. Now, as we start out, we've already noticed these things, and that is that Jesus said 7 things while he was on the cross. These are things that I would urge you to remember because they're very important things about what he had to say, thank you, while he was there on the cross. Now, as we turn to Mark's account, he tells us about the crucifixion, and he said, now it was the 3rd hour. That means it's 9 o'clock in the morning when they're taking Jesus out now, 1981 years ago, last Friday, 9 o'clock in the morning, they're taking him out to put him on there. Now it said there were 2 others, criminals, and so they put these criminals up there with Jesus to crucify them at the same time. Now, the interesting thing is, we told it in Mark that they crucified these 2 robbers with him, and so the scriptures was fulfilled, and he was numbered with the transgressors. This is interesting when you see the death of Jesus. How many things that he fulfilled that he had no control over. Now, when I say he had no control over, there are a lot of people that say, well, Jesus studied what the Christ was supposed to be like, and he made sure that he did these things. Well, there are just certain things that you can't do. You can't choose your mom and dad. You can't do a whole lot of things in life, and one thing is that as far as your death is concerned, you can't choose some of these little intricate things about your death. So it had been prophesied back in Isaiah 800 years ago that he was going to be numbered with the transgressors. So it was no accident that the criminals were crucified with him. Now, the moment that Jesus died, the moment Jesus died, why, we found last week that the veil of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. Now, this is a very important thing, that here's this great veil that's back there. Only the high priest could go back. He could go back once a year, and that is where God said, I will meet you. And so nobody else was able to go back. Now, at this time, that veil was ripped, not from the bottom to the top, but from the top to the bottom. It wasn't where a man could grab it and start doing that. But as we have to get back to this, I keep forgetting punch a button. As we look at this, the Bible tells us why this is true. It says that when God had them to put that temple the way it is, and they had it here where on this side a common priest could go, but on the other side only the high priest once in the year to offer his blood to God. Now he said that was a symbol. That was a picture, as we've talked about so much. And here's what it indicated. It told the people that the way into the holiest of all was not yet manifest. Now, the holiest of all here would be the room that is back there, and that represented heaven. This room out here represents the church. And so what that veil is telling you is that you can be in the church, you can be a priest, a spiritual priest, but you don't know how to get back there. There's only one way in which you can get back there, and we're going to find out what that is. He said, now while the first tabernacle was standing, it was up there to show them, can't be, for it was symbolic for the present time. So it was ripped then. And now then, for the first time in history, man can look back there. We can see, wow, now we can see into the holiest of holies. And what happened to cause that? It was the death of Jesus Christ. When Jesus shed his blood, that's what caused that. So now then, mankind can look back there, and at that particular point. So at the moment of his death, that great thing happened. Now, some strange things also happened at the moment of Jesus' death. Now, there had been darkness over the whole land for the past 3 hours. Remember, these are things we've studied before. For the past 3 hours, from 9 in the morning until, or from noon, 12 o'clock noon, until 3 in the afternoon, there was great darkness over the whole land. Now, at the very moment that Jesus died, there was light. All of a sudden, it was taken away, and now we have light. And the temple was torn from top to bottom, and then some other strange things happened. And that is, the earth quaked, the rocks were split, and the graves were opened, we're told. Now, Matthew tells us this, and as we look at it, those three things really go together. Now, it's kind of hard for us to see that here in our culture. When we bury people, we do it in cemeteries. But over there, they would have rock cliffs. They're all over the place. And they dig back tunnels into these cliffs. And that is where they would dig their burial places. They had burials back in there. Then they would have a big rock that you roll in front of the hole, so that when somebody wanted to go into the grave, they'd have to roll the rock back, and then they could go into the grave. Now, you say, why would somebody want to go into the grave after somebody's been buried there? Well, many of these graves held more than one person. They would hold several people. Like sometimes families today will buy a plot of land in a graveyard, and so the whole family can be buried together. So they'd have different burial places in there. So one guy dies today, you want to go in. Somebody dies 3 years from now, you roll it back, you take that person in. Then another thing they did was that every year they would go in and they would leave the body in there for 1 year. It would decay down to bones, and then they would go in and get the bones, put them in a box, and bring it out. So they had entrance in and out of the caves. Now it said the earthquake, there's a big earthquake, happened when Jesus died. Not only did the veil split, big earthquake. The rocks were split. In other words, now I don't know where all rocks would be, but they were split and opened the graves. So some of those rocks that rolled in front of the grave would be split. Other times, I guess, that the side of the grave would be split open, but the graves were opened. And then the graves were opened. Many of the bodies of the saints who were fallen asleep were raised, and coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. Now, this is something that we don't hear too much about because we don't know much about it, and preachers don't preach on it because what is there to say? This is all we know, that there were people who were raised from the dead, and then I want you to notice it says, coming out of the grave after his resurrection. So they went into the city, but Jesus was raised first, then the rocks were split, earthquakes happened, and dead people were raised, and they came into Jerusalem. So you look at all the things that happened the day Jesus died there in Jerusalem. and you see that great event of darkness, and then all of a sudden light, and then all of a sudden an earthquake, and then all of a sudden rocks were split open and people were raised from the dead, and all of that was taking place when Jesus died. So there was a great impact that was made at that period of time. Now another strange thing happened on that day, and it's recorded in Joel 2:31. Joel said, before the great day comes, the day of salvation, the moon is going to be turned into blood. Now, this is something where I've always thought, well, this is figurative language, of which sometimes the Bible uses this in figurative language. But the interesting thing is that Joel says this, Peter then says it in Acts 2, and as we look at it, we find that NASA now has been able to go back and check those blood moons. Now, that's interesting because we just had one this last week. Cloudy out here, we couldn't see it, but it's a blood moon. And so what he did, Joel there, 600 years before Christ, said, now before salvation is preached, the moon is going to turn into blood. And all these other things will happen. Amazing how all of these things happen at that particular time. Now, as we go back and we start looking into the burial of Jesus, the women are among the last to leave Jesus. They stayed to the very last until he died on the cross, until he was taken down. They stayed until the very last that was there. That's kind of important for us to note because later on they're going to go out there and start looking, and they needed to know where he was laid in the tomb. All right, now Jesus died on Friday, the day of the Passover. This is kind of my summary that I've put here. Now, after all that we've read and all that we've seen of what these Jews have done, I've got down here, and of course this is tongue-in-cheek, but these holy and righteous Jewish leaders can now go eat the Passover before 6 o'clock and remain holy and unclean. Now, they have been going through this Passover day. They haven't eaten it. They've been too busy killing Jesus. And so they've been putting it off until the evening, which they should have eaten last night. But they're waiting around. And after Jesus dies at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, then they're getting ready to take his body down and do away with it, and they can go eat that Passover. Now, they feel that they've cleansed themselves of anything to do with the betrayal of Jesus. Remember when they brought back the 30 pieces of silver, they said, oh, we won't put that back in the treasury. No, this is blood money. We're too righteous. When Pilate had his court trial, they wouldn't go into that Gentile building because they wanted to stay clean so they could eat the Passover. Now, this was Friday on this day, and Jesus died at 3 o'clock. Now, this was the day of preparation for the Sabbath. Here it is. We have the Sabbath coming tomorrow. This is Friday. It's 3 o'clock, and so they don't want to leave the body hanging on the cross because that would pollute the land. So they said, we need to get this body down and buried before 6 o'clock tonight. And so they made arrangements, went to Pilate and told him, need to get this thing down. And then after they'd done this, of course, they could hypocritically then claim, look, we've done everything according to the law. We haven't violated any law. Of course, all they had done was lie and deceit and murdered an individual and such things as this. But from their viewpoint, the job is now done. Now, there was more prophecy to be fulfilled after Jesus died. He didn't just die and then the prophecy ceased. But as we start out here, it said here's the day of preparation, preparing for the Sabbath. That Sabbath was a high day. It was a very special day. And the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken. So they go and they say, would you break their legs? Now you say, why? Well, I've got a picture up here of the way a person would be hanging on the cross. And there's one where his nails through his feet. And if you see there, they generally put a little block of wood where the heel could just barely rest. And a man could take rest his heel on there a little bit and then raise himself up. And the reason for that was, as you look over there, they did it with a kink in the legs. Now, if you hung a man on the cross, he's hanging down, it would squeeze his diaphragm and he couldn't breathe. And he would die within just a little while, just a few minutes, he would die. So in order to make the punishment excruciating, they put that little block of wood there where he could put his heel on there and lift himself up and take a breath of air and then maybe rest himself a little bit. And as a result of this, people sometimes stayed on the cross for several days, that they were able to fight that through and do that. Well, the Jews came and told him, they said, we nailed him on there at 9 o'clock and said, would you go break their legs now? Now, why break their leg? Because if he broke his legs, then he can't put any weight on his legs, and he's going to, and as a result, he'll die in a few minutes. So, that's the reason that came to pass. Now, when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. For these things were done that the scripture should be fulfilled, not one of his bones shall be broken. So you see, here's another prophecy that was fulfilled that Jesus couldn't have had anything to do with. So they broke the legs of the other two guys, so they would die immediately, but they didn't break the legs of Jesus. Then another prophecy came into pass. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. And he who has seen has testified. That's John. John said, I've seen it and I've testified, and I'm telling you the truth here. He said, for these things were done that the scripture should be fulfilled, not one of his bones should be broken, and they shall look on him whom they pierced. So here's another prophecy back in Zechariah. So even after Jesus died, the way that the Romans went about doing things was fulfilling prophecies that Old Testament prophets had made hundreds of years before this time. So now we move in very hurriedly here to the burial of Jesus, which happened between 3 and 6. They had these 3 hours to get this done. So they came out, and now they're going to bury him. All right, as we look at his burial, we see that Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews. So now he was a disciple, and in a minute we're going to see that he was a council member also. He was a prominent member of the council. So he goes and asks Pilate, can I take his body with me? In other words, I want to honor his body and bury his body. Now, Pilate was just marveled that Jesus had died so soon, sent his Roman soldiers out to find out and to break their legs, and he had. Then, another thing that tells about Joseph of Arimathea, now keep this in mind because there's going to be another prophecy come up. It said, now he was a council member, a good and just man, and he had not committed or consented to their decision. Here's a man, member of the Sanhedrin. He's a member of the Supreme Court that has determined to put Jesus to death. But he's a secret disciple, and he hasn't gone along with it. Anybody remember another guy by name who's in that Sanhedrin, and he also is a secret disciple? Nicodemus. Right, Nicodemus is in there, and we studied a little bit about him. So Joseph of Arimathea came in, and he asked, can I have the body? Now, look at this. Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man, a prominent man, a just man, he was given the body, and then Nicodemus comes. Now, Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea would be friends, so speakingly. They would be in the same Sanhedrin court. So now Nicodemus comes, and he brings myrrh and aloes and about 100 pounds. So he's bringing a lot of these spices. Then they took the body of Jesus and bound it in strips of linen with the spices, as the custom of the Jews are to bury. Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and a garden with a new tomb, in which no one had been laid. So there they laid Jesus, because of the Jews' preparation day for the tomb was nearby. So here we have Nicodemus and Arimathea, or Nicodemus and Joseph. Joseph is a rich man having his own private grave that is here, never been used yet. He wants to honor Jesus by taking Jesus and burying his body, in this grave. Nicodemus comes, who had obviously been another rich man, and they anoint him with 100 pounds of these spices. This was a normal way that the Jews went about it. What they did was that, I got ahead of myself. Here's the prophecy. It said, and they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death. So Isaiah 53, 800 years before Jesus died, said they're going to make his grave with the wicked. He's going to be associated with the wicked, but with the rich at his death. So here are two rich men, and one of them is volunteering his grave. The other one is volunteering all of these spices. And so Jesus then had a rich man's burial. But the point that I'm trying to make this morning as we hurry through is that all these prophecies are there, and Jesus is fulfilling them all one by one, even after he dies. Now, it said they came and they brought this. Here's a picture of the way that they would normally do an individual, that they would rub these spices in his body, and then they would take cloth and wrap around the body. Now this body has one big cloth wrapped around it. Generally, I think, generally they would have a piece of cloth that would be 100 yards long and about this wide, and they would wrap and wrap and wrap and wrap and wrap and wrap each limb and wrap the whole body so that it's all wrapped. But they would have these spices that's in there. So here would be something like Jesus is as they're getting ready to put him into the grave. Now, here's the tomb of Jesus as shown today. If you go over there, they'll take you to the tomb of Jesus, and they'll say, here it is. Now, the fact of the matter is, we don't know where his tomb is. We do know that it wasn't far from where he was crucified, up on that hill, because the Bible tells us that. That's the reason that they took him down and rushed him down to Joseph's tomb, put him in there, so the body could be buried before the Sabbath day. So they took him to a tomb, and here is one of the tombs that is close by. And so that's the reason they think it is the tomb he had, because it is very close by. So you'd go in there, and in there, with a tomb like this, there would be various shelves, various ledges cut out of rock where you would lay the bodies that's in there. So you'd lay it, then you'd roll that big stone back over it in there, and it generally takes several people to roll it there. But here's the point. Here it is. They laid him in this tomb in there, and the stone against the door. And Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, observed where he was laid. That's just a little point, but it's just a little point that I'm putting in here for a purpose. That is, in the morning, these women are going to come back to go into the tomb to do some more preparation for his burial. They knew where to go. They didn't have to guess at where he was laid, which tomb. So they're going to come back, and the reason they knew that is they stayed and they followed and they went to the tomb and they knew exactly where that tomb was. Now, they put him in. And then we read, as Matthew tells us, about sealing the tomb. It said, now, on the next day, which followed the day of preparation, that'd be Saturday morning. Now, Jesus is going to be raised Sunday morning. So he was buried Friday night. Saturday morning, why the Jews came, the chief priests and Pharisees, they gathered together to Pilate and said, Sir, we remember while he was still alive, how that deceiver said, after 3 days I will rise. You know, that's interesting, because that's exactly what he said. But if you'll remember the accusations they made against Jesus, they would say, well, he said, you destroy this temple and I will build it in 3 days. And they'd say, he's talking about this other. When Jesus was using this to show them, no, that's the one miracle that I'm going to do that you know beyond any shadow of a doubt is you destroy this temple I'm living in. You destroy this temple, and I'll raise it in 3 days. Now, they knew that. But they would use this other as an excuse. So they said, now, he prophesied this, and his disciples know that. Therefore, command that the tomb be made secure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away and say to the people, he's risen from the dead. So the last deception will be worse than the first. So they explained to Pilate, if you don't put a guard out there, his disciples can come, steal his body, then they'll make a claim that he's raised from the dead. And Pilate said to them, now this is kind of interesting. He said, you have a guard, go your way. Make it as secure as you know how. You might say, why did you say it is interesting? Remember Pilate's conflict with these Jews? Remember how they went back and forth? And Pilate would try to release him, and the Jews would come back and put Pilate in a predicament with Caesar. And finally, they won, and finally Pilate had to give up, and then Pilate got back some of his vengeance by putting on the cross the King of the Jews. And they said, oh, don't put that up there. Put up there, he said he is King of the Jews. And Pilate said, what is written, that's it. And so that's the last they've seen of Pilate. Now they come to Pilate, and they want one more thing. Pilate and the Jews are at odds with one another. They said, would you seal that tomb? Because we don't want people stealing his body. Pilate says, you have a guard. Make it as secure as you know how. Do whatever you want to with it. So they went and made the tomb secure, sealing the stone and setting the guard. They did 2 things. They put the guards out there. There would be 4 of them. They put them out there, and they would work in shifts. Every shift, 4 new guards would come. And they sealed the tomb. In other words, that picture has a strap going around it where if somebody rolls that big rock away, there's going to be evidence they broke that strap. So they're making it so that nobody, absolutely nobody, can get into this tomb. Well, the problem was that 1981 years ago today, an angel rolled away the stone and petrified the guards. The angel came down, took that stone, rolled it away, and sat upon it. And said, now after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, so that would be about 6 o'clock, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to the tomb. You see, they knew where they were coming. They had watched him be buried. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. His countenance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. And the guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. So you can imagine what would happen to you if you saw an angel come and he had these qualities. There was a big earthquake, and he came and he rolled back the stone, and he was white, just as white as snow, and sat on that stone, and you're out there guarding. They became like dead men. It just absolutely, totally petrified them. So what did they do? They went in to try to save their lives. They went in, and while they were going, they behold, some of the guards came into the city and reported to the chief priest. So they came running in, and they told him all the things that had happened. Now, when they told him all the things, you know, an angel came down, and he white as snow, he rolled that stone away. Here's what we saw. You'd think that the chief priest now might say, you know, he was the Son of God. But no. They told him all the things that had happened. And when they had assembled with the elders and consulted them, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers. So now they're bribing the soldiers, saying, tell them, the disciples came at night and stole him away while he slept. So here's what we want you to tell them. And we're going to pay you great sums of money. And if this comes to the governor's ear, now there's a problem. The governor's Pilate. And if Pilate hears about this, those guards can be put to death. So they now are in a predicament again. And of course, they're being paid off with a large amount of money, and that's going to pacify them. But if it does come to his ears and he calls you in, he said, we will appease him and make you secure. So don't you worry. We know how to handle Pilate. We've been handling him up to now, so go your way and don't worry. So they took the money and did as they were instructed, and this saying is commonly reported among the Jews unto this day. So as Matthew is making this statement, he would have been writing this gospel years after. And Matthew says, during those years, another 30 years or so, since Jesus has died, this report is still commonly heard. We hear this report of that really is what happened. And so there is where we close today. Next week, as we pick up our story then, we'll see what happens to Jesus as he comes out of the grave and begins to make his appearances.